Now, for this module and for this course, we'll use Firebase, which is a Google service. You can visit firebase.google.com to learn more about it. And whilst it sounds like the name of a database, it actually is a server-side solution offered by Google, which gives you a lot of services. We only need a few of those. And amongst these services is a web server with an attached database. So you basically get a database and a server that talks to the database as one service. And that's exactly what we need here, because we can then use this web server to communicate with it and automatically have that server then communicate to a database out of the box without us writing any server-side code. You can also use it for free. All you need is a Google account. And once you did log in with your Google account, you can simply go to that Firebase console there to then create a new project here. Now, I already did create one. If you're creating a new one, you simply need to check these boxes here and then create a new project with any name you like. And once you're in the project, you should see a starting screen that looks something like this. Now, in here, as I said, you have a bunch of options. Firebase has a lot of services, and this is not a course about Firebase, and I will not turn it into one, so we'll not cover Firebase here. I'm only using this as a dummy backend because it gives us a web server where we don't have to write any code, and which we can then use to learn how Flutter talks to such a web server. And the knowledge you'll learn in this course, therefore, is applicable to any backend, to any server you use, not just Firebase. And that's important, by the way. If you search for Firebase Flutter, you actually find out that there is an official documentation on how to add Firebase to your Flutter app. And they do this through the Firebase SDK for Flutter, which is essentially a Flutter plugin you install. Now, you can do this if you really want to use Firebase and all its services it offers. So all the things like analytics, machine learning, and all the stuff this service offers. And a lot of that will then also be a paid service. If you want to use that, then of course the official SDK, the Firebase SDK or the Firebase plugin for Flutter is a great idea because it makes working with these Firebase services easier. I don't use the Firebase plugins here because I don't want to teach you Firebase plus Flutter, which won't help you much if you ever build a Flutter app that needs a different backend. But instead I want to teach you Flutter with any backend. And therefore we'll just use the generic parts of Firebase, which you can easily replace with other backends. So I hope that's clear. So in the Firebase console, the interesting part for us right now is the database. Now, it might look here like we're setting up a database to then we talk directly, but always keep in mind, Firebase abstracts away a lot of the complexity, and therefore it looks like we send requests directly to a database. We will send requests to a Firebase server, which then simply translates that into instructions, into query statements it sends to the database. Now, for that, we need to create a database, and we'll not use Cloud Firestore, because that's a bit of a more complex database. We'll use the real-time database, which you should find if you scroll down a bit. There, you simply can create a database and start in test mode. That's important because this ensures that everyone can read and write. And for this module, that's what we need. Later, in the authentication module, we'll lock that down, and I will show you how authentication could work in such an application. This is the screen you should then see. And this is, in the end, your web interface where you can see the data which will be stored in the database and where you also get a URL, which is at least a part of the URL to which you have to send your requests so that they are automatically translated into database queries. And that's really important. You don't directly talk to a database here. You talk to a web server which has this URL or which has different URLs, which will always start with this one. And then that web server knows how to interpret certain HTTP requests to then interact with your database. That's how that works. So with that set up, let's now dive back into our Flutter code and make sure that there we can now add products which are stored in the cloud on a web server, and that we can then also load the data from there and so on.